LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 28th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. This week I have the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. Down in the video description I put my clip list of my 11 clips and the source of all the clips. Also there are links to that down in the video description. I've put my topic description, which is, the topic is Traitor Trump, because from the New York Times report that Trump either ignored or didn't know about U.S. intelligence finding Russia paid bounties for attacks on U.S. forces and U.S. coalition forces in Afghanistan, to Trump's inexplicable love for the Confederacy during the month plus now of post-George Floyd protests, to Trump's poor, dishonest response to COVID-19 that betrayed the nation in a way. I guess that's sort of the topic that fits least under the Traitor Trump subject, I guess. But those are the three things I'll mostly be covering in this video, using newsmaker clips like Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and Vice President Mike Pence, and several other newsmakers. And I will show you news summaries from all five of the big corporate outlets. But I want to start first with a political comedy clip that I thought I would show you from a few days ago. It's not technically during the weekend, but it shows how low our legislative branch has sunk, especially, of course, on the part of Republicans. But it's also showing you like some of the nefarious shit that's going on in the background that doesn't get the spotlight because of COVID-19 and George Floyd. And this is specifically about how Bill Barr is obstructing justice with the so-called Justice Department. I'm going to talk about that a little more when I get to clip 9, Meet the Press, where Chuck Todd talks to John Bolton about the whole Russia bounty story and veers off into Russia collusion, and that's one of the things that Bill Barr kind of covered up. But before I get to all that, I want to show you this clip from the House Judiciary. It's the House Judiciary hearing on Justice Department oversight, and there's a link to the full hearing down in the video description. There are like 4 different members of Congress arguing, I think Louie Gohmert is the one who's like banging on the table like a toddler during Professor Donald Ayer of Georgetown University trying to talk about some of this nefarious Attorney General William Barr shit I was talking about before. And anyway, I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Another 30 seconds. In closing, it needs to be said that Bill Barr does regularly lie in ways that impact official action. Along with his continuing media project to make Americans believe that the FBI conspired against Donald Trump, his statements about the Mueller report, Jeffrey Berman's supposed resignation, and Barr's own role in the events in Lafayette Park come quickly to mind. So does his practice of regularly shrouding himself in the rhetoric and trappings of the rule of law, even as he desecrates and undermines the institutions that make it possible. But to me, Barr's crowning dishonesty is the portrait of Edward Levy that a recent New York Times article showed hanging on the wall of his conference room, as though the current incumbent has
Regular order. The witness will conclude.
Regular order is right.
We're way beyond regular order.
The witness will continue.
Can I have one more sentence here?
By all means.
Okay. But to me, Barr's crowning dishonesty is the portrait of Edward Levy that a
Mr.
recent
Chairman, I would
New York
ask
Times
that the sergeant at arms
witness
be
will
called
conclude.
upon to stop the disruption of this meeting. I can't hear this witness. This is a very important witness.
Yeah, well, he's way beyond
And the
his
chair
time.
has
And if
the
there are no
authority-
rules about when
chair
people
has the
can talk,
authority, does
there's
he
no
not?
rules about when you can make noise.
The gentleman makes
Doesn't
Good
the chair-
point, and the chair will enforce the 5-minute rule. Witness will proceed.
Chair is not enforcing the 5-minute
The
rule.
witness will conclude.
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous. Do you have no respect for the rules whatsoever?
The witness will conclude.
He's 2 minutes beyond concluding, and you don't let us have that kind of time. You gavel down immediately. You're being grossly unfair. This man had a
witness will
written
conclude.
statement, and he knew to cut it to 5 minutes. He couldn't do it. Either we have rules or we don't.
The gentleman will suspend. The witness will conclude.
Thank you.
Well, then
In
we can keep
closing, it
making
needs to be
noise.
said that Bill Barr does regularly lie in ways that impact official action.
Mr. Chairman, there's not order in the room. There's a banging.
No,
that's
there's certainly not.
disrespectful.
Mr. Chairman, would you have Gene Krupa removed?
The witness will conclude.
That's what you said a while ago, and he didn't conclude.
The gentleman will suspend. The witness will conclude.
So I guess the last thing I want to sum up with, I've said all the rest of this, but the last point I'd like to make is that I think his crowning dishonesty in the face of what he is doing to the Justice Department is the picture that I saw in the New York Times a few weeks ago, a portrait of Edward Levy on the wall of his conference room, as though the current incumbent has anything but disdain for the beliefs and achievements of his predecessor. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Is it not appropriate for the chair to exercise discretion in extending the 5-minute rule as the chair sees fit?
It certainly is appropriate.
And is it authorized under the rules of this committee?
It certainly is authorized under the rules of this committee.
Well, then, cannot the chair call in the sergeant at arms to maintain order when a member of this panel is out of order and disrupts
We'll
the
move
meeting?
on to the next witness.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Elias.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Elias.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Elias.
Parliamentary point of order, Mr. Chairman.
There is no point of order.
How do you know I've not said one? Here we go
The
again.
gentleman is completely out of order, Mr.
The
Chairman.
gentleman will state his point of order.
Point of order is according to the House rules, a House chairman cannot capriciously determine the 5-minute rule at the whim of what he wants. It has to be fairly and impartially applied. That is the spirit of the House rules, and that is not what has happened.
You'll apply it fairly?
We are applying the 5-minute rule as provided by the House rules.
So you're ruling on my point of order?
The gentleman has not stated the point of order.
I did say the point of order. I stated the point of order is the rules are being violated by a capricious chairman who is not following the rules of the House by arbitrarily deciding when the 5-minute rule will be applied and when it will not be applied.
You have not stated a cognizable point of order. The chairman has discretion.
Mr. Chairman, you've not stated a recognizable way of running a committee in 18 months. So, I mean, let's determine
The
it.
gentleman will suspend. The gentleman has not stated a cognizable point of order. Mr. Elias.
So I got to agree with Representative Hank Johnson in that clip asking Jerry Nadler, why don't you call him the sergeant at arms, who's like basically the cop in the room at the House Judiciary Committee hearings, and get him to expel Louie Gohmert for acting like a toddler banging on the table when, the thing is the majority rules, especially in the House of Representatives, where the majority makes the rules pretty much, and that was just a ridiculous display by Louie Gohmert, and it shows how low things have sunk. And like I said, if you hang on till I get to clip 9, where I show how Chuck Todd does not do a good job of cross-examining John Bolton on the subject of Russia collusion, I will talk a little bit about the nefarious stuff that Bill Barr's been doing. I did see that I got a new member, Joe M, during the beginning of the show here. That's Joe pressed the join button down under the video, so I appreciate that. And then Matthew, who has been giving super chat contributions the last 2-3 weeks, asks about if your videos are demonetized, how come I still see annoying Epic Times ads on them? have you ever read the Epoch Times? Do you have any thoughts on them? Actually, last week's video was eventually monetized on appeal, although even when it's like limited ads, some people do still see ads. But last week was like the first week in 3 or 4 weeks when it wasn't demonetized. But most people did not see ads till like 48 hours after the show. But as to Epoch Times, I actually got a copy of Epoch Times in my mailbox in the last couple of weeks, and I looked at it and I said, oh, that's that newspaper that advertises on my videos. But I just looked at some of the headlines and it seemed sort of reminiscent of various right-wing conspiracy sites. I don't know, but I didn't really look at it carefully. But thank you, Joe M, for joining, and Matthew for that super chat contribution. And anyway, like I showed that whole long clip to just show the dysfunction of the legislative branch, and Jerry Nadler is not the strongest committee chair. I mean, that doesn't mean he's a bad person, just means that he sometimes does not do the best job at policing the members of his committee like the chair is supposed to do. That's why I showed that last clip in addition to the nefarious stuff about Bill Barr I will talk about later. But I want to get to the news summaries and then the newsmaker clips. The first news summary is from NBC News' Meet the Press. I said when I get to clip 9 much later, I will be criticizing Chuck Todd for not standing up for Russia collusion. But the news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press is, if not the best, at least one of the best, and it's of course the longest of the news summaries. It's almost 4 minutes long, and rather than over-introduce it, as I often do, I will play it for you, read my notes, see what you're saying in the live comments along the way, and talk about it with you a little more after we watch Chuck Todd. Hold on. I guess I should introduce it a little bit, and you'll see that he talks about all the this is it moments that have occurred, Charlottesville, etc., etc. I mean, you can go all the way back to when Trump came down the escalator and said, Mexicans are rapists, and then attacked John McCain for, I like people who weren't captured, and over again, nothing stuck against Donald Trump, but COVID-19 seems to be sticking. And that's the beginning point that Chuck Todd makes in this news summary that's live and then goes to the pre-recorded package. And that's enough introduction before I show you that clip over here.
Good Sunday morning. Throughout his presidency, there have been countless this is it moments that opponents of President Trump felt sure would puncture his standing with voters. Charlottesville, immigrant children in cages, impeachment, just to name 3. But nothing seemed to move Mr. Trump's approval ratings much one way or the other. Now, however, the president is facing a crisis he has been unable to tweet, bluster, or bluff his way out of. COVID-19 and the death toll and economic dislocation that come with it is there for all of us to see. Every American is aware of it. Every American is affected by it. Every American has an opinion about it. The past week felt more like April, with states and then the whole country setting records for new cases. Cities shutting down and renewed fears that hospitals would soon run out of ICU beds. Through it all, President Trump has been in denial, and the United States has become the object of avoidance, ridicule, and even pity around the world. At home, COVID has given Republicans a permission slip to criticize or ignore the president, and provided space for former administration officials like John Bolton, whom I'll interview in a moment, to criticize a president of their own party. Ultimately, as the number of cases goes up, Mr. Trump's political standing goes down, making him now the most endangered incumbent since George H.W. Bush lost in 1992.
we find ourselves careening toward a catastrophic and unsustainable situation.
Texas and Florida, praised by President Trump for being among the first to reopen, are now backtracking, abruptly setting new restrictions on bars, restaurants, and beaches.
There was widespread noncompliance, and that led to issues.
If you do need to get out, please wear a mask.
On Friday, the U.S. set a record for new cases. In 25 states, cases have increased by 25% or more over the last 2 weeks. In 9 states, cases are up more than 100%.
The time for prevention measures was a month ago. Now, the wheels are coming off.
But on Friday, at the first coronavirus task force briefing in 2 months, the vice president appeared to deny that reality.
We have made truly remarkable progress in moving our nation forward.
The nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Fauci, says current efforts to test sick people, isolate them, and trace their contacts are not working.
If we don't extinguish the outbreak, sooner or later, even ones that are doing well are going to be vulnerable to the spread.
For months, the president has minimized the virus.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China.
Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away.
That this is going to be gone.
It's going to go. It's going to leave. It's going to be gone. This is going to go away without a vaccine.
6 months into this pandemic in the United States, that message largely dismissing the virus hasn't changed.
We're doing so well after the plague. It's going away.
This is a localized situation.
We slowed the spread. We flattened the curve. We saved lives.
But the curve hasn't been flattened. The virus isn't going away, and the issues that plagued early testing efforts remain.
So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
But did you ask to slow it down?
If it did slow down, frankly, I think we're way ahead of ourselves, if you want to know the truth. We've done too good a job, because every time we go up with 25 million tests, you're going to find more people.
Some Republicans would like to see President Trump stop politicizing mask wearing.
Until we find a vaccine, these are really important. This is not as complicated as a ventilator.
And joining me now is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Ayer.
And his name is actually Alex Azar, and I don't have any clips of Alex Azar, even though he was on multiple shows. He tried to explain the inconsistencies, the dishonest, poor response of the Trump administration to COVID-19. I'll talk about it a little bit when I show the Mike Pence clip coming up. But I want to get through all the news summaries. I noticed that this live stream has already been demonetized. I wanted to show you what I was talking about before. Let's see if I can take a screenshot of it while I'm talking to you all. And then, here. Okay, I took a screenshot. I'm going to export it here as a JPEG file. Screen demonetized. Okay. Sorry, I know this is a little tedious, but I wanted to fully answer that question I was talking about earlier from Matthew about my... Where did I put that? Over here in pictures. Here it is. Oh, wait, this isn't going to work. Hold on, I know this is a little tedious. Here we go. So here I'm about to show you my video, what YouTube shows me about my videos, today's video, and then the videos for like the last month, and which are monetized. If they're monetized, they have a little green $sign, and if they have an orange $sign, it means limited or no ads. So you can see there that last week's is the only one with the green $sign this week, and then multiple previous weeks all demonetized. So anyway, I just wanted to show that screenshot so you can understand the kind of thing I'm dealing with. And Why was it demonetized? Well, is it my description of, I talked about attacks on coalition forces. I talked about COVID-19. I talked about the George Floyd protests. I don't know. YouTube doesn't tell me why I get demonetized. But anyway, I want to just show you all that to follow up on that question from Matthew earlier. And actually, I really like this ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, which I've spent so much time talking. I'm just going to show you. It's only about 90 seconds, and then I will discuss what's in it after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. More than 5 months ago, the first case of COVID-19 was confirmed in the United States. But as we come on the air this morning, the pandemic's grip on our country appears to be as strong as ever. Almost 43,000 new cases reported Saturday. 4 states hit new daily highs. 5 have set new records for hospitalizations. More than 40 states marking higher weekly averages than last week, with new records set nearly every day. Overnight, the number of cases worldwide topped 10 million, more than 1 out of 4 right here in the United States. We all had hoped the worst had passed, and thankfully, the mortality rate of the virus is coming down. But the notion that America could reopen quickly without consequence has now evaporated. Hard-hit states like Florida and Texas are starting to reverse their reopening plans. Several more putting plans on hold, as Dr. Anthony Fauci warns of outbreaks across the South and West that could spread across the country. That came at Friday's press briefing from the White House, the first one in almost 2 months. Notably, the president did not attend, but after canceling a weekend trip to his country club in New Jersey, he offered this positive take.
We're making a lot of progress with the whole situation that came in from a place called China. You probably know, you probably see. But we have a little work to do, and we'll get it done.
And we are joined this morning by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker, welcome to This Week.
Morning.
And I will have a clip of Nancy Pelosi, clip number 8. That's one of my 2 clips talking about this breaking story. It was breaking on Friday that the Trump administration had this intelligence that Russia was paying bounties for the killing of U.S. forces and coalition forces in Afghanistan, giving the Taliban bounties. And then there was another breaking story just in the last several hours before my broadcast that the Trump administration, if not Trump himself, had this intelligence as early as January because, U.S. commandos were getting it in their interrogations of captured Taliban prisoners that they were getting paid by the Russian GRU, Russian intelligence services. It's like, I don't know, did this happen in the last season of Homeland on the final season of Homeland on Showtime? I don't know, something very similar, but it's really not funny. I apologize for laughing there, but I think that I took my thumbnail for this video out of the last 20 seconds of that ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. Trump's happy talk about how, again, COVID-19 is under control. And my one criticism of that news summary is that George Stephanopoulos kind of emphasized at one point that the mortality rates are down, but we're sort of like going down and then back up, and we've got cases up, and then hospitalizations are starting to go up, and you can pretty much predict the next thing to go up, mortality. So that's my one criticism of George Stephanopoulos there, and I have to give credit to Jake Tapper in this next news summary for both starting off with the state of our union this week is that we're basically desperate for leadership, which we don't have from the president. So I guess that's why Trump is always saying CNN is fake news, because they're telling the truth about our times. But they also showed this clip that was later deleted by Trump, or his retweet was later deleted, of this thing that went on in the Villages in Florida, which is this giant complex of retired senior citizens. I actually watched the clip like 6 a.m. this morning before Trump deleted his tweet, and it's at the end of the, well, I won't over-introduce it. Jake Tapper will introduce it, and I'll talk about it a little more because I have a couple clips on it at the end of, that's like clip 10 and 11 at the end. But here's the Jake Tapper news summary from CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is desperate for leadership. After months of personal and economic sacrifice and loss, it is now clear that the U.S. has failed to get the coronavirus pandemic under control. As of this morning, there are more than 2.5 million cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. and more than 125,500 Americans dead. Friday, at the first coronavirus task force briefing since April, Vice President Pence painted a picture that seemed frankly out of touch with reality, declaring the U.S. had, quote, flattened the curve as cases hit a new record single-day high. On Saturday, Florida broke its record for new cases with 9,508 cases reported in a single day. The governors in Florida and Texas are already rolling back some reopening plans, and other states have paused theirs. As the nation is scrambling to control the spread of this virus, the president, who spent Saturday golfing, has been tweeting, among other subjects, about his political opponent Joe Biden, about the vandalism of monuments, and about his own television ratings. Just this morning, shockingly, the president tweeted thanking the great people of the villages, and he showed a video in which someone driving a golf cart with Trump 2020 signs can be clearly heard shouting, "White power."
White power! Yes, there you go, white power. You hear that?
The message the president has not been communicating, however, critical public health guidelines developed by his own administration, including a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. Secretary Azar, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I do have
So like I said, no Alex Azar clips, although he tried his best to give the talking points of the Trump administration that don't even make sense. But I'm just going to show Vice President Mike Pence in clip 7 coming up after all the news summaries. But I think I pretty much explained why I liked what Jake Tapper did there. And he did show that whole like white power thing. You know, Trump deleted that tweet or retweet of the white power thing where he said that they were great people at the villages in Florida. And then the White House put out a statement saying that they didn't hear the white power thing, even though if you watched it, it's in like maybe the first 8 seconds. There's this old, I mean, the whole thing is kind of ridiculous because it's all these really, and I know I'm a fairly old person myself, but these are people who are like even much older than I am in the villages in Florida on both sides, as Trump would say, you know, find people on both sides, when they're all like these senior citizens living in this retirement community. Some of them are pro-Trump and some are anti-Trump, you know, like pro-Black Lives Matter. And the pro-Trump people are going along in this procession of golf carts while the anti-Trump people hold up signs and yell at them, and they're all like yelling obscenities that you don't expect to hear from your grandparents or whatever. But this one guy in like the first 8 seconds says like white power 3 times maybe, and he holds up a fist, so you know it's like it's almost like the Black Power fist but white. I mean, anyway, so how you could, I guess Trump didn't watch the clip at all if you believe the White House statement, or I don't know what to believe. But anyway, kudos to Jake Tapper for showing that. And then the next news summary is CBS News' Face the Nation, where the old host I used to show clips from, John Dickerson, is back in for Margaret Brennan this week for some reason. And he does a brief introduction and then gives it over to Mark Strassman, who's always been reporting from Atlanta, which is where the Centers for Disease Control is, but he never seems to even mention the CDC until this week. He actually says something that important that came out from the CDC and mentions that's why he's been hanging out in Atlanta all this time. And anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch the CBS News Face the Nation news summary over here.
And welcome to Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan is off. We begin today with the coronavirus that is continuing to cause more uncertainty in the U.S. New cases are increasing in 29 states. 17 report record 7-day averages. In response, governors in 15 states have paused or reversed plans to reopen. To date, the virus has killed over 125,000 people across the country, and there are more than 2.5 million confirmed cases in the U.S. Our coverage begins this morning with Mark Strassman reporting from Atlanta.
COVID has exploded. America reopened and relaxed, and by stealth, the virus resurged. New infection records now stamp a red alert on summer weeks ahead. In Florida, last call for alcohol was at noon Friday. All bars abruptly ordered closed. The state smashed its COVID record, more than 9,500 infections in a single day. On Friday, Miami announced it's closing the beaches before the busy July 4th weekend.
There was widespread noncompliance, and that led to issues.
Texas, another hotspot state that reopened early. It also closed its bars after record new cases. Positivity rates also demanded it. Testing shows more than 1 in 10 Texans has been infected.
If I could go back and redo anything, it probably would have been to slow down the opening of bars.
Harris County, the Houston area, considers its COVID threat severe. Its health alert advised residents to stay home because hospitals are approaching capacity.
It begs for aggressive and sustained action.
Arizona acted. Its governor also told people to stay home and wear face masks. Getting people to wear masks literally has been a fight. This tea shop in Washington state throws out customers who wear one. In Kansas City, mandatory face masks goes into effect tomorrow. It joins 17 states and the District of Columbia with mask requirements. But every state at least recommends wearing one indoors. It's another sign no one knows where this virus will erupt next. This is the Atlanta headquarters of the CDC. This week, the agency reported that the number of COVID cases has been dramatically undercounted. For every American with a confirmed case, 10 more have had it. That means at least 20 million Americans have had the virus, John, and everyone else remains vulnerable.
Mark Strassman, thank you. We turn now.
And so, like I said, thank you, Mark Strassman, for reporting something from the CDC, given that you've been reporting from Atlanta for all these weeks for no apparent reason, and finally there's a reason. And the one thing I forgot to say about that clip, you notice at the beginning he like has this like a little bit too cute rhyme, COVID has exploded. And, you know, I wasn't sure, is that too cute or not too cute? And then a little bit later, he says, like, last call for alcohol. It's like, I don't know, did Mark Strassman get a hold of a dictionary somehow for this report? That I don't think we need to have, like, superfluous rhyming to deal with during the COVID-19 epidemic. But otherwise, it was a really good report on what I was talking about last week. Remember, I was wearing pandemic peach and saying how COVID-19 is back in the news and is going to be an increasing story. You saw it got a lot more coverage than like the post-George Floyd protests, although there was some discussion of that from the newsmakers that, like I said, I'm going to talk about that when I get to clips 10 and 11. But let me get to the last news summary. This is Fox News Sunday. Nothing about, of course, Trump retweeting white power. Nothing about nothing about Trump not knowing or ignoring the intelligence about Russia putting bounty on the killing of U.S. troops and coalition forces in Afghanistan, although that was mentioned briefly like half an hour in their panel discussion. But one thing you see from David Spunt that I didn't hear in any of the other news summaries was, I guess this is one thing to show that they did a little bit of journalism actually occurred on Fox News, even though if you read this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room, from Gabriel Sherman, you'll find out that Fox News was actually created to be a propaganda arm of the Republican Party, which is pretty much the Trump party at this point. But they do show how the Trump campaign took stickers off of, social distancing stickers off of seats in the at the Tulsa rally that I talked about so much last week. Well, that's reported at the end of this Fox News Sunday news summary that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. There are new calls this weekend for Americans to embrace social distancing as coronavirus cases surge across the South and West. The virus now blamed for 125,000 deaths and more than 2 million infections. And the White House Coronavirus Task Force, which until Friday had not held a briefing in 2 months, now says it's considering a new testing strategy. In a moment, we'll talk with former CDC Director Dr. Tom Frieden. But first, let's bring in David Spunt at the White House with the latest on efforts to contain the pandemic. David.
Chris, the president insists he has this pandemic under control despite the rising number of cases. Vice President Mike Pence has canceled upcoming campaign events this week because of those rising numbers. As infections continue to climb, parts of the southern United States are beginning to close once again.
Wear a mask. This is the single most important thing that you can do to slow the spread of COVID-19.
Beaches in Miami-Dade County will be closed for the 4th of July weekend as Florida COVID-19 cases rose by 9,500 yesterday, the largest daily increase since the virus came to the United States. Arizona numbers are also surging.
It's going the wrong way, and we're very close to overwhelming our hospitals in terms of the number of beds.
In Texas, another hotspot, the governor is ordering bar owners to once again turn off the lights. The governors of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey are requiring anyone traveling from those hotspots to quarantine for 14 days. On Friday, the White House Coronavirus Task Force held a news conference for the first time in 2 months, where the doctors on stage had a stern warning for restless Americans.
We are all in it together. And the only way we're going to end it is by ending it together.
This, as new video released by the Washington Post, shows employees inside the Tulsa arena last week removing thousands of stickers placed by the arena management to establish social distance ahead of the president's first rally in months. A campaign official insists that the campaign was in compliance with local guidelines, and everyone who attended that rally, Chris, was provided with face masks and hand sanitizer. Chris.
David Spunt reporting from the White House. David, thank you. Sure. And joining us now.
And you see in the very end there that David Spunt has 9:03 Eastern Time a.m. on Sunday in his shot there. So, if he wanted to, he could have reported on the story that broke Friday. Oh, by the way, there's a link down in the video description to that New York Times story from last Friday about how Trump either ignored or didn't know about U.S. intelligence finding that Russia paid bounties for the killing of U.S. troops and coalition troops in Afghanistan. That didn't make it into the Fox News summary. And, of course, the whole white power retweet from Trump, the great people in the villages, white power, that didn't make it into David Spunt's story, even though it was 9:03 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday when that tweet had already occurred. It even came up in like I said, the panel discussion later from the one Democrat on the panel. But anyway, those are the 5 news summaries from ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the big 5 corporate outlets. You can compare and contrast them. That's why I present them that way. Which one do you think is the most accurate description of the reality from last week? You let me know down in the comment section. The next clip I want to show is really the one clip on what is really the biggest story, the Trump administration's failure to respond to the COVID-19 crisis in a way that actually protected people of the United States. We're at about 125,000 dead Americans, which is just unimaginable 6 months ago. If you've been watching my Sunday live clip roundup, when the idea that maybe there might be 100,000 dead Americans, that was like, oh my God, Trump is saying that would be success. 100,000 dead Americans, that's success. And now we're like 25% above that, and we're not anywhere near the end. I think this COVID-19 epidemic is going to go well into the Biden administration. If we're lucky, it's going to go well into the Biden administration. So Trump is never going to win his war on COVID. And anyway, I wanted to show Mike Pence trying to actually defend the Trump administration's performance here. And this is not that long a clip. It's only a couple minutes. If you want to see the whole CBS News Face the Nation interview of Vice President Mike Pence, there's a link down in the video description to the Face the Nation YouTube channel where they've uploaded the entire interview. This is a couple minutes I wanted to talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
You're talking about being able to monitor the situation. The argument is that the situation shouldn't be existing in the first place. Europe waited longer to reopen, and they have seen less trouble in reopening. In Florida, since Memorial Day, which was a new stage of reopening, cases are up 165%. There were almost 10,000 cases in a single day in Florida. Something happened, and it's not just a question of monitoring. The experts are saying these states walked into a problem with their eyes wide open because they opened too early. And that's a mistake which seems to repeat the original mistake, which was to downplay and not take seriously the nature of the threat.
Well, I beg to differ about the reopening, and I beg to differ about downplaying. On the second point, I mean, President Trump suspended all travel from China before the first case of community transmission occurred in the United States.
There were 9 cases when he did
We
that.
stood up. Well, no, not. There were cases in the United States of people who had returned to this country, but the first case of community transmission would occur weeks later. And he stood up the White House Coronavirus Task Force, and everything I've described about an unprecedented scaling of testing, the development of billions of medical supplies, ventilators, the development of therapeutic medicines like remdesivir and others that are being developed, the launch in record time of a vaccine development. But as we've arrived at this moment, it's clear across the Sun Belt that there's something happening, particularly among younger Americans, and that's why we fully support Governor Abbott's decision to close bars and limit restaurants. We fully support steps taken in Florida and elsewhere, and we'll continue to support those efforts.
Why not ask people to wear masks?
Well, we believe people should wear masks wherever.
Why doesn't the president say
social
that?
So, like I said, you can see the full interview at a link down in the video description to Face the Nation's YouTube channel. And Mike Pence did go on to give sort of a mealy mouth endorsement of wearing masks. But apparently he had this, since that CBS News Face the Nation interview, he had this task force press conference. I think it was in Texas. I think it was in Texas. And he much more strongly endorsed the wearing of masks. So who knows, maybe Trump will actually endorse the wearing of masks. You may remember months ago I talked about how masks don't actually protect you. There's no reason to wear a mask to protect yourself. And that was actually the medical guidance months ago, because very few people had the virus and wearing a mask didn't protect you. And there was a shortage of masks that medical professionals actually needed. But now, months later, when many people have the virus, you saw like maybe 20 million Americans wearing the mask doesn't protect you as much as it protects other people if you unknowingly have the virus. And that's why mask wearing, if you can get it up to a certain level, stops the spread of the virus, and is something that over the last months we've all learned is very important. And it's really sad it's become a political issue that, like, Democrats by like 80% want to wear masks, but Republicans it's only like 50 or so percent, and you need everybody, like 80-90% of people, to be wearing masks to really stop the spread of the virus. So I wanted to make that point because I didn't run the clip long enough to hear what Mike Pence said about masks, but his defense of the Trump administration on COVID-19 just is ridiculous. Later on CBS News' Face the Nation, they showed a CBS poll. I almost took the clip where it's like Trump's poll numbers on how he handled the COVID-19 crisis is getting worse and worse and worse. It's the worst it's ever been because he's done a really bad job. So that is kind of a betrayal of the nation, that he's done not only done a bad job, but lied about things over and over again for months to make it, downplaying the seriousness, even now saying that it's under control when it's not under control. So I wanted to talk about that, but the real reason I put Traitor Trump in the title was because of the breaking news over the weekend. This is the New York Times article I was talking about. Russia secretly offered Afghan militants bounties to kill U.S. troops, intelligence says. And like I said, there's a link down in the video description to that New York Times article. There was a breaking news story, follow-up on that one today, saying that as long ago as January, U.S. commandos captured Taliban troops who, under questioning, told them that story. So it's been basically half a year that the Trump administration's done nothing about that. And one of the reasons I think this might be a story that's going to last a while is this tweet I saw from Republican Liz Cheney. I was talking about wearing masks earlier. I noticed Liz Cheney, who seems to be, she's a Republican from Wyoming, the daughter of Dick Cheney, vice president to George W. Bush, a old right-wing conservative. Liz Cheney earlier in the week posted a picture of her father, Dick Cheney, wearing a mask and saying, "Real men wear masks." So that made me think she was like positioning herself for the post-Trump Republican Party. And this tweet from her about this story, here it is, the Liz Cheney tweet I saw this morning. Is it a coincidence? It's 4:20 a.m. Is that my time zone? It's 4:20 a.m. I don't know what the time zone is in Wyoming or D.C., but here's her tweet from 4:20 a.m. about this story. Liz Cheney saying, if it's true, she wants the White House to explain why weren't the president or vice president briefed. Was the info in the presidential daily brief? That's the written brief that Trump obviously doesn't read. And then 2, who did know and when? And then 3, what has been done in response to protect our forces and hold Putin accountable? So that's like the Liz Cheney tweet that makes me think this is an actual big deal if, even Republicans care about it. And I'm going to show you 2 responses. First, from Nancy Pelosi and that on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Then John Bolton talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press. Here is Nancy Pelosi talking about the many ways in which Trump seems to be beholden to Putin, talking about what is it that Putin has on Trump, and all roads lead to Putin when it comes to Trump. in the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
I want to turn now to that rather startling report in the New York Times that appeared yesterday. We're going to show it on the screen right now, that Russia secretly offered Afghan militants bounties to kill U.S. troops. It reports that American intelligence officials have concluded that a Russian military intelligence unit secretly offered bounties to Taliban-linked militants for killing coalition forces in Afghanistan, including targeting American troops. The intelligence finding was briefed to President Trump, and the White House National Security Council discussed the problem at an interagency meeting in late March. Officials developed a menu of potential options along with an escalating series of sanctions, but the White House has yet to authorize any step. Now, the Director of National Intelligence put out a statement late last night denying that the president had been briefed. The president has said that as well, but not denying the intelligence. You're a member of that so-called Gang of Eight that gets intelligence. Were you aware of these reports?
No, and we have called for a report to the Congress on this. This is as bad as it gets. And yet the president will not confront the Russians on this score, denies being briefed, whether he is or not. His administration knows, and our allies some of our allies who will work with us in Afghanistan have been briefed and accept this report. Just as I've said to the president, with him all roads lead to Putin. I don't know what the Russians have on the president politically, personally, financially, or whatever it is, but he wants to ignore. He wants to bring them back into the G8 despite the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine, despite what they yielded to him in Syria, despite his intervention into our election, which is well documented by our intelligence community, and despite now possibly this allegation, which we should have been briefed on.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about. Do you believe that the president hasn't been briefed on this? And secondly, how would you explain, the New York Times is saying was actually in the president's daily brief, perhaps he didn't read it. How would you explain if the president weren't briefed on this?
Because the president wants to ignore any allegation against Russia. As I've said to him in that meeting when I'm pointing to him in a blue suit, with you, Mr. President, all roads lead to Putin. Russia's never gotten over the humiliation they suffered in Afghanistan, and now they're taking it out on us, our troops. This is totally outrageous. You would think that the minute the president heard of it, he would want to know more instead of denying that he knew anything. Now, if in fact, we'll find out if he has been briefed, and it was in his daily brief, but if it were not, what does that say about the concern that those who briefed the president have about not going anywhere near the Russia issue with this president? This is appalling. This is beyond, the list is a long one in terms of his ignoring what Russia has done. You see what he is a gift to Russia to diminish our leadership in NATO, diminish our troops in Germany, all a gift to Putin. Something is very wrong here. But this must have an answer.
You've raised that several times now. You said you don't know what the Russians have on President Trump, but do you believe they have something on him?
Well, how would you explain his refusal to even to ignore again and again the intelligence that puts right at the Russian doorstep the involvement into our elections, for example? Now he's saying this is fake news. Why would he say that? Why wouldn't he say, let's look into it and see what this is? Giving money to the Taliban, a bounty on the lives of our troops in Afghanistan. How do you answer to the families of those whose family members are serving there? And he's engaged in peace negotiations with the Taliban, and he's kissing up to Putin in every way, saying he should be in the G7, even though he annexed Crimea and caused death and destruction in Ukraine. So totally irresponsible. Something is wrong with this picture. But putting that other aside, for the moment, let's just dwell on this. We hear also that the administration is considering diplomatic response to this or sanctions to this. Well, they either know about it or they don't know about it. The American people need to know what that is.
Before we go, I do want to ask you a little bit about the 2020 presidential campaign. You've seen all these polls this week.
So for those who have been watching my Sunday live clip roundup for the over 7 years I've been doing them, you know that I'm not always a fan of Nancy Pelosi. She is the Speaker of the House at this point, representing a safe Democratic district in San Francisco, so she doesn't always express the talking points that I might want the Democratic Party to express from my point of view, but she has been a pretty savvy political operator for a lot of her career, so I have to give her kudos for that. And I think in that last clip she laid out a lot of data points as to why we should at least have concerns, suspicions, as to Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. It's like all over the map, and a lot of times he, especially if you watched my coverage years ago when Trump met with Putin in Helsinki and pretty much sided with Putin over his own intelligence agencies, and then it seems for the entire year of 2020, from January up until now at the end of June, he has done nothing to respond to intelligence reports that say Russia has been paying the Taliban to kill U.S. troops in Afghanistan. So I have to support Nancy Pelosi's arguments in that last clip. This next clip is Chuck Todd over on NBC News' Meet the Press cross-examining John Bolton. This is my one John Bolton clip. I think it's going to be on other shows next week, so next week there might be another John Bolton clip. I have all these books behind me. You notice John Bolton's book is not back there. I won't be buying John Bolton's book. I don't, even though he may like lose all the profits to, there's a lawsuit that Trump brought against John Bolton's publication of his book, and Trump immediately lost on his attempt at prior restraint because the First Amendment is particularly strict about prior restraint. Means that you get a court to say you can't speak before you even speak. Well, now John Bolton's book is out there, but his profits could still be taken by the federal government if he didn't go through the whole review process. And my personal hope is that the profits from John Bolton's book will be taken by the Biden administration, like I was talking about earlier. But anyway, here's Chuck Todd talking to John Bolton about this news about Russia, and then he lets John Bolton get away with saying that there was no Russia collusion in a week when Rogers, well, I'll talk more about Russia collusion after we watch Chuck Todd not cross-examine John Bolton on Russia collusion in this clip.
Well, before we get to the substance of your book, I want to get to what we've just learned over the last 48 hours. There's some reporting this weekend that reported by the New York Times, that an arm of Russian military intelligence has secretly been paying bounties to Taliban-linked militias to kill American and other coalition forces in Afghanistan. There's a lot we don't know. The U.S. government has not confirmed or denied the intelligence report. They have only simply denied that the president was informed in March of this. I'm just curious of your initial reaction to this report, Ambassador.
Well, it's, as you say, there's a lot we don't know, so we should be cautious. But from what we do know from the president's own tweets this morning, to me it looks like just another day at the office in the Trump White House. I've never recalled a circumstance where the president himself goes out of his way to say he wasn't briefed on something. We may be in the, what the definition of is here. When you say briefed, does that mean he's never been told of anything about it? We don't know the quality of the intelligence or the extent of it. If it does go back to March, that raises other questions. And the key point is, if there's any accuracy to it. If the Russians have actually been paying to see Americans killed, that is a very, very serious matter.
I'm just curious, if there was an intelligence assessment like this, can you imagine a scenario where it is withheld from the president? I mean, that part of this just seems extraordinarily hard to believe. Is it not for you?
Well, again, it depends on what the level of confidence in the intelligence is. I tried during my tenure at the White House to read as much intelligence as I could. That doesn't mean I passed all of it on to Trump or to others. I think it's just important to understand there needs to be a filter for any president, maybe particularly for this president. So there's obviously more to this story, but it is pretty remarkable the president's going out of his way to say he hasn't heard anything about it. One asks, why would he do something like that? And I think the answer may be precisely because active Russian aggression like that against the American service members is a very, very serious matter, and nothing's been done about it, if it's true, for these past 4 or 5 months. So it may look like he was negligent, but of course he can disown everything if nobody ever told him about it.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that part of that the president is afraid to make Putin mad because maybe Putin did help him win the election and he doesn't want to make him mad for 2020?
Honestly, I don't think there's evidence for that, and I think it's a mistake on the one hand to say the Russia collusion theory was true, which some opponents of Trump still can't let go of.
I'm not saying collusion,
versus
but Ambassador,
Trump
I'm not saying collusion.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on. Versus the Donald Trump approach, which is the Russians didn't do anything at all in the election. I think it's clear from all the data, and it's been discussed publicly, of course the Russians tried to interfere in the 2016 election, and they're going to try and do it again this year, as will the Chinese and maybe the Iranians and the North Koreans. That's why during the Trump administration, whether the president was fully cognizant of it or not, the agencies and departments charged with trying to prevent that worked very hard to increase our defenses. So why is the president so defensive about Putin? As I say, I don't read anything into it necessarily. If I had evidence, I would reveal it. I just don't know what to say other than he likes dealing with strong authoritarian figures.
You've made it clear that you think the president's unfit for office. Do you think a second term...
So, yeah, then Chuck Todd goes into what John Bolton says about Trump being unfit for office, but doesn't really cross-examine him on the whole, like, Russia collusion was a hoax, which John Bolton still gets to say, which in a week when, I showed that clip at the beginning about the nefarious stuff that Bill Barr was up to, and that Georgetown professor Donald Ayer talked about the way Bill Barr, the Attorney General, spun the Mueller report to say there was no collusion, and there was this big redacted part that had to do with Roger Stone. Roger Stone was one of the multiple avenues of Russia collusion that didn't rise to the level of a criminal conspiracy that Mueller thought could possibly be charged, but Roger Stone was the go-between between the Trump administration and WikiLeaks' Julian Assange, who is the publisher of the material that Russia hacked from the Democratic Party, but because of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, I happen to have the U.S. Constitution right here as always. This is the ACLU version that I always keep with me. So because the First Amendment says that the publisher cannot be charged for the conspiracy of hacking the Democratic Party, because they're just publishing, they're not actually a conspirator with the hacker. That's why Julian Assange is, or the Trump administration is not a conspirator with the Russia collusion. Even though Roger Stone told Trump that WikiLeaks was going to publish information, and Bill Barr redacted that from the first published version of the Mueller report, which was unredacted in the last week, and other information about how the Justice Department was trying to stop Roger Stone from getting strict penalties because he was a friend of the president's. That came out in testimony this week, actually covered on Fox News Sunday in the last half of the program, but still was covered there. But that's what I was talking about at the beginning of the live stream in terms of nefarious shit that doesn't get a lot of attention because of COVID-19, because of the post-George Floyd protests, and that's where the two big spotlights have been, even though Bill Barr is like committing obstruction of justice with Trump's Justice Department, and all sorts of other bad things are going on in the Trump administration while nobody's looking. But hopefully I was thinking last week, it was right around June 20th, and that's like July, August, September, October, November, December, January, 7 months till the end of Trump. If we don't reelect Trump as president, that's the big decision as to whether the Constitution here, is it going to continue to be a viable document? Well, whether we re-elect Donald Trump is pretty much going to decide that question. But anyway, I have two more clips I want to show you all before, two more news clips, and then I have the bonus Dash and Sandy clip. But these are the clips on Trump's support of the Confederacy, ridiculous response to the George Floyd protests that have been going on for over a month now, and particularly about how he retweeted this weird video from Florida, this retirement community, the Villages, where in the first 10 seconds you saw this guy going, "White power, white power." Well, here's Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union asking the one black Republican in the U.S. Senate, Tim Scott, about that Trump tweet that has since been taken down, which you'll see Tim Scott thinks should be taken down, over in this clip.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. There is a push by some Mississippi lawmakers this weekend to remove the Confederate emblem from that state's flag, but President Trump is moving in the opposite direction, issuing an executive order to protect statues and monuments, including Confederate generals. These cultural changes come as legislation to reform policing appears completely stalled in Congress. Joining me now, the author of the Senate Republican bill on policing reform, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. Senator Scott, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. We have a lot to get to, but first, I do have to ask you, President Trump just retweeted a video. President Trump just retweeted a video this morning featuring one of his apparent supporters shouting, "White power." Take a listen.
White power! Yes, there you go, white power. You hear that?
What's your reaction to the president retweeting that?
Well, there's no question. He should not have retweeted it, and he should just take it down.
Does it offend you, though? I mean, it offends me, and I'm white.
Well, listen, I mean, if you watch the entire video, you can't play it because it was so profanity-laced. The entire thing was offensive. Certainly the comment about the white power was offensive. There's no question. I mean, we could play politics with it or we can't. I'm not going to. I think it's indefensible. We should take it down. That's what I think.
Let's talk about policing reform, which is something you've put a lot of energy to.
And like I said earlier, if you want to see the source of all the clips that I'm taking, they're down in the video description. If you want to see Tim Scott talking about his police reform bill that the Democrats wouldn't even allow to come up for debate, and then the House passed a much stronger bill this week, and how that's all going to work out, we'll see in the coming weeks, but I'm not really covering that. I'm more talking about the Trump himself retweeting this white power video from the villages in Florida. My one criticism of CNN's State of the Union is that they show that at 6 a.m. Pacific time, 6 to 7 a.m., and then they replay it from 9 to 10 a.m., and even though Trump had taken down his retweet in the 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific hour, they just showed a replay of the 3-hour earlier version, even though it was already taken down. But I don't know, it's not that big a deal because the damage had already been done. I don't know why Trump... Do you think Trump didn't know it said white power when he retweeted it? I mean, he is like a dumb motherfucker, so it's certainly quite possible. But on the other hand, he's a racist motherfucker, so also quite possible that he retweeted it to try to gin up his racist base for the November election. But then why did he delete it? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section about whether he's a racist MFer or a dumb MFer. And very much earlier in the program, I saw in the live comments someone saying, I was using salty language when I was talking about Bill Barr and the nefarious shit he was up to. So I think I've gone up another level, but we're much later in the program at this point, so I guess that's to be expected. But before I finish the program, and I have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip from just about the last day, but before I get to that, I want to show sort of the alternate universe over on Fox News Sunday, where they're trying to say that the Black Lives Matter activists are the ones who are treasonous because they want to take down those Confederate statues, even though the Confederacy couldn't be more treasonous, which that's in the intro here, where Chris Wallace talks about the taking down of Confederate statues, and then the Trump tweet against this. I don't know, there's this Black Lives Matter activist from New York who was on Fox News earlier this week. His name is Hawk Newsome, and he said this thing about how Black Lives Matter wants to burn down the racist system, or, well, you'll see the clip, and then he says, like, and you can take that as you want, literally or figuratively. And it was like a great technique to get it replayed over and over again on Fox News, where they want to have their viewers very scared of Black Lives Matter, which has no, like, hierarchy where anyone is, like, really labeled as a definitive leader spokesperson. But I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final news clip where Chris Wallace and Fox News Sunday try to scare their viewers with this Black Lives Matter leader this morning over here.
Protesters in American streets are calling for the country to address our racial tensions, both current inequities and contentious symbols of America's past. But how to do that is a key question. For one perspective, let's begin with Hawk Newsome, head of Black Lives Matter, Greater New York. Mr. Newsome, you created quite a stir this week when you spoke with my colleague Martha McCallum. Let's take a look at what you said.
If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it. All right, and I could be speaking figuratively. Okay. I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation.
Afterward, President Trump tweeted his reaction to your statement. This is treason, sedition, insurrection. Question, sir, what do you accomplish with rhetoric like that? How do you think that helps?
Well, here's the thing. A lot of people don't understand how the streets or the people feel. I have an in-depth knowledge of this. I live in the Bronx. I live amongst the people. So it's not like I'm sitting here pushing a button, or anyone can push that button. But if people keep seeing these images of their babies, of their relatives, of black people being killed, they keep dealing with financial inequality and inequity, and it reaches a point of frustration, then people lash out. This is a matter of inevitability that people will lash out because they're feeling like they're backed into a corner.
But just 2 years ago, back in 2018, you gave a TED Talk in which you preached nonviolence and talked about how during the riots in Baltimore over the death of Freddie Gray, you tried to stop the violence. I want to play a clip of you from just 2 years ago.
Do you have love in your hearts? Do you love your neighbor? Do you believe in the Bible, the Quran? Do you believe in your religious teachings? Because I guarantee you, all of them tell you to help your neighbor.
That man wouldn't have talked about working to burn down the system. What happened?
Well, what you have to understand is over time, how about this? I'm not encouraging people to go out and hurt other people. That's not what I'm promoting. What I'm talking about is systemic inequality. What I'm talking about is America treating crime as something that needs to be handled with policing instead of defunding the police and looking at crime from the perspective that it's a health crisis. The same way we looked at heroin addiction when it was only black people as tough on drugs, war on crime. We have to, and when it became white people, we looked at it as a public health crisis, as something that needs to be treated. That's the way we need to look at crime. Okay? You think about police, over 80% of their calls are not violent felonies. Therefore, we should really look and see why police are being called. Look at the causes of why people are committing crime. They're desperate, they're poor, they're undereducated, and they are left out to dry by this American system of government. So if you want to decrease crime, you don't hire police to come in and arrest everybody and brutalize people. If you want to cure crime, then you must go to the source. You must invest in people. You must give people jobs. You must make people employable. Places with the highest murder rates have the highest rates of unemployment. So let's start talking about entrepreneurship programs in our communities. Let's start talking about schools that actually meet the needs of people. That's something we could do with the $100 billion that this country spends on police.
But Mr. Newsome, let me pick up on this. We're going to have Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton on next, who's been a leader in the civil rights movement for years. She's working in Congress right now to try to pass policing legislation. She says if you want to see a statue removed, you don't tear it down, you go through the proper legal channels, whether it's Congress or the City Council. There has been a split in the civil rights movement, the African American community, for at least a half a century now, between Malcolm X and By Any Means Necessary on the one hand, and Martin Luther King and working through the system on the other. Didn't MLK get a lot more done in a practical sense?
I believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a brilliant strategist, especially in the form of media savvy. But what we have to understand is black people do not trust politicians. They don't trust.
And Hawk Newsome, I think, did a great job of presenting actually Black Lives Matter talking points to the Fox News audience that probably doesn't hear them in that way. But what was up there with Chris Wallace trying to get people to go back to the 1960s and see Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X. Malcolm X, who was assassinated in February 1965, and then Martin Luther King in April 1968. What is that all about? And even the premise of Chris Wallace's question there about, I mean, one of the reasons that that Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolent civil rights movement was so successful is that he was like the good cop to Malcolm X's bad cop of not so nonviolent resistance, and they were both assassinated. And I'm not entirely sure the U.S. federal government wasn't involved in both those assassinations, although if you listen to what I just said, I didn't also say that I'm sure that they were involved, but there are a lot of questions about both those assassinations that's like a whole different quagmire of weeds I don't want to get into at the very end of the program. But I don't think Chris Wallace bringing up Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King did a lot to add to the many grievances that Hawk Newsome, I think, brought up. And I think Hawk Newsome really played Fox News by using the words "burn down the system," and then he even said literally or figuratively, it might just be a metaphor, but he's got a lot of play on Fox News because that's what that's the rhetoric they want to use to scare their old white viewers, especially as a propaganda arm of the Republican Party, as detailed by Gabriel Sherman in his book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room. But anyway, I want to finish up the broadcast. I think I've given you all enough commentary and criticism. I do want to thank all the super chat contributors so far. I showed some of those earlier, but I actually, after I talked about how my videos are getting demonetized, I got several additional contributions here. Here you go. So I really appreciate that. I saw Sexy Bob gave multiple contributions along the way, so I appreciate the super chat contributors, the people who joined as new members by clicking that join button below the video, and of course I put links down in the video description to become a monthly patron on Patreon, or to give a direct PayPal contribution. Those are the two venues where at the $5 level I can give you this weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer sticker, or at the $10 level you get the sticker plus the Constitution, which is being shredded by Trump, but may come back into vogue after November 3rd, 2020. Who knows? So check those links out down in the video description. And before I finish up the program, I do have a Dash and Sandy clip. It's not from today, or, well, it's in the last day. Over my shoulder over here, I have my Mr. Spock mug because I'm a big Star Trek fan. And if you're a fan of Deep Space Nine, you know that on Deep Space Nine, they always talked about how instead of saying the last 24 hours to talk about the last day, they'd say the last 26 hours, because that's the day on Bajor. And I took this clip of Dash and Sandy about 26 hours ago, right before dinner time, and you're going to see a lot of Sandy vocalization, a little bit of Dash in the background for the final clip over here. And that's the Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the week. I appreciate all of my live viewers. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you can let me know what you think about all the topics I covered, and I will be back next week and every Sunday for the foreseeable future with my Sunday live clip roundup. And until next week, or until I have some reason to upload a edited, produced video during the week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.